All right. Let's get started. Hi, everyone. I know folks are still trickling in. We have a lot to discuss, and I'm really excited to welcome folks to the second edition of Indi and Friends. And I'm going to just adjust my audio. Hopefully, folks can hear me well now. So I'm Indi Dutta-Gupta, President and Executive Director at the Center for Law and Social Policy, CLASP, and your moderator for today's discussion. So Indi and Friends is a CLASP-sponsored series that seeks to inform and shift the narrative around timely and important issues that impact policy advocacy nationally at state and local levels. So today's segment focuses on what I consider a crucial element in the formula around policy, centering those who are marginalized and excluded by public policy and implementation in a way that has tangible, sustainable, and transformative impact. Some may call it community engagement, community partnership. Others may say it's building community power. But at the core is always centering people most impacted, with expertise that stems from that experience, and in ways that have rippling effects on our economy and democracy. And centering people and advocacy, in my view, affords us the unique opportunity to do the right thing in the right way at the right time and for the right people. So during today's conversation, I'm going to encourage folks to use the Q&A box to share your questions with the panelists, and we'll have an opportunity close to the end to try to respond to a handful of questions. And now let me introduce you to the folks who are joining me here. 5 dynamic individuals who have been at the forefront of making change in their respective fields with community partnerships that work. I'm excited to engage each of them in a conversation about what it means to build power and policy advocacy, centering folks who are the most impacted as the experts that they are. So let me just begin with Andrea Anaya, a member of CLASP's New Deal for Youth initiative and a changemaker. Andrea is currently a senior at Marymount University in Arlington, Virginia, studying political science and sociology. Through her activism, Andrea seeks to empower her community and inspire positive change in the immigration space, striving for a more comprehensive immigration reform. Her passion and motivation come from her experiences as an immigrant who migrated to the United States at the age of 5, and the social and economic hurdles she has encountered due to her immigrant status. So I'm very happy to have you join us today, Andrea. I'm also pleased to welcome Ms. Roslia Grillier, or Ms. Rose, a founding member of United Parent Leaders Action Network, or UPLAN. Ms. Rose is also a member of UPLAN's Governing Council. UPLAN is a core partner of CLASP around childcare and early education work, as well as our immigration and immigrant families work. Ms. Rose sits on multiple local and national boards and advisories that center community and parent engagement around a core of intersecting policy issues. Thank you for joining us today, Ms. Rose. Also with us this afternoon is CLASP's very own Parker Hilkeson-Davis, Senior Policy Analyst on our Income and Work Supports team. Parker is a subject matter expert in social policy, benefit eligibility, human services delivery, racial equity, community partnership, and state and local policy regarding SNAP, TANF, and Medicaid. She's also a leader of CLASP Community Partnership Group, a diverse collective of activists from across the United States who partner with nonprofits, administering agencies, and policymakers to ensure that their work is grounded in the expertise of people directly impacted by poverty and/or anti-poverty policies. Glad to have you join us today, Parker. Next, we have Monica Hobbs-Findluen, who is a senior program officer at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Monica has promoted justice and equity throughout her distinguished career. Her work at the foundation now supports policy strategies that help all families have the resources necessary to raise thriving children and achieve health and well-being in their communities. Under her portfolio at the foundation, Monica is pioneering an alternative approach to grant-making titled Supporting Policy Ecosystems to Make Children and Families a Priority, also known as EcoSys for short. This effort seeks to put the power in the hands of grantees in deciding how funds should be utilized, dispersed, and focused to achieve the best outcomes for children and families. Thank you so much for joining us today, Monica. And last but not least, please welcome Alexander Hertel Fernandez, currently an associate professor of international and public affairs at Columbia University, where he also serves as vice dean for curriculum and instruction. Alex studies the political economy of the United States with an emphasis on the politics of labor and social policy. Previously, Alex served in the Biden-Harris administration, in the Department of Labor, and in the White House Office of Management and Budget, or OMB. While at OMB, Alex helped lead efforts around increasing public engagement in the regulatory process and reducing burden and access to public benefits and programs. He also coordinated a White House review of regulations around nutrition and food assistance, among other issues. Welcome, Alex. And I'm just going to acknowledge, I believe we only have Alex up till 4 p.m. today. So we're grateful he can join us until then. Thank you for fitting us into your schedule. And a huge thank you to all of our participants as well for taking the time to join us today. Let's jump in. So let me begin our conversation with a quote I came across recently from an article by Professor Don Moynihan. He writes, we bemoan the fact that conservatives seem to understand the power of burdens, but have used that understanding to make government dysfunctional. Progressives, on the other hand, were just not paying attention. Instead, they focus on building new programs rather than making sure the ones we already have work. And they fail to think about burdens in policy design, proposing narrowly targeted programs that prove difficult to implement. I'll end the quote there, but now, of course, lots of folks were paying attention, including some of the folks here. But nevertheless, I think it's an important observation. And we certainly at CLASP believe we can both improve our current programs and that there's a need for new ones. But as you think about this quote, I'm turning to each of you, our panelists. Can you just reflect a little in your work on why it matters to center lived experience in advocacy, policy, government, philanthropy, and broader social economic justice ecosystem? And I will start with you, Ms. Rose, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. And I love that quote, and it is so perfect for this setting. And so let me just start by saying, first of all, it's all connected. Across the country, parent-led organizations are working on a plethora of issues, and they're all siloed around some of the same issues, and they're all figuring out how to come up with the new approach that will make things different, when we all know that the issues that we're working so hard on are oftentimes rooted in policies and systems that are antiquated and in desperate need of reform. And so as we're thinking about this, that quote is so important, because if we're trying to come up with something new and you're building it on something old, that's like a sand foundation. Whereas if you're starting with the foundation, what's already there, what can we improve upon, and how can we do that together? This is the key to success. Unity is always very instrumental at the forefront of victory. And I'll stop there.
Informative and inspiring. Thank you, Ms. Rose. And, I'll just note, I think about an old very conservative NYU political scientist, some of you may know, who used to say things like, we shouldn't offer people help without also hassling them. So it really underscores the point of the quote. Just think about the explicit nature of what folks have done to these programs. Andrea, I'd love for you to take a moment to react.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. Reflecting back, I mean, I'm only 22 years old. Only been on this earth for a certain amount of time. But through my experiences in advocacy in the past 5 years, I think for me personally, what I've seen happens when young people get involved in policy is not only the empowerment, but it builds trust. It builds that bridge of communication that I think sometimes within my generation, we feel like we're speaking a completely different language than our policymakers in the realm of immigration itself, where it affects such a vulnerable community. Often people who don't have English as their first language, it's important to connect within the community and have these conversations and let them know what's going on, because a lot of the times these decisions are being made without any input, without any knowledge. And to just look at data and look at numbers doesn't really tell you the entire picture. So really, I think at the end of the day, policy is people, policy is community. And that's why our centered lived experiences are so important within the policymaking process.
It's brilliant, very wise. And I will just note that for some of us at CLASP, certainly myself, when you talk about how this also sort of builds trust, a lot of this is core to well-functioning democracy in my own view. I know Alex might touch on that a bit, but democracy doesn't start or stop at the ballot box, and I think this is really essential to how we as a nation want to function or should want to function. With that note, I'm going to turn it over to Alex to give some thoughts.
Thanks, Indi, and really appreciate the opportunity to join this discussion. And I'll just say, having had the opportunity to work in government, I saw at least 3 different ways in which engaging with the populations, the communities that are directly affected by our policies and our programs yields better policy and yields a better and stronger and more accountable government. I'd start with policy design. So in those cases where we are standing up new programs, writing new regulations, ensuring we're consulting with the folks who are going to be affected by these programs right from the start means that we're not going to miss out on things that those folks recognize from their lived experiences, their day-to-day lives, and will cause problems or barriers going forward. It strengthens our ability to analyze those policies. The federal government, anytime there's a new program or regulation, we need to think about the costs and the benefits. And all too often, it's too easy to focus on the costs and benefits that are easy to add up and easy to turn into dollars and cents, but don't reflect people's lived experiences. How does this policy change my dignity, my standing in the community, my sense of fairness? Those are the kinds of things that you can reflect on when you talk to folks who will be directly affected by these policies. And then you can include those in our understanding of the likely impact of a program. It makes for better implementation of these policies when they're in place. I mean, I think about a program like unemployment insurance and the fact that during the pandemic, there were new barriers that emerged to getting timely benefits. By talking to unemployed workers, we're able to figure out where are those pain points, how can we address them? And lastly, to your point, Indi, about the intersection between all of this and democracy, we're in an era of really low trust in government. And I have to think part of it is the fact that every day when people encounter these programs that are intended to help them, there are these barriers that they may experience. And the more we can do to empower people to overcome these barriers and have a say in the design of these programs in their day-to-day lives, the more we're going to strengthen democracy, not just at election time, but all throughout individuals' lives.
Great. So better design, better implementation, and a stronger democracy. What's not to like? Let me turn it over to Monica.
Great. Thank you so much. And it's such a privilege to spend the afternoon with you all here in this conversation. And I continue to learn and grow from everything, all the work that you all are doing. So part of the work that we're doing at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is really about building economic inclusion for family well-being. And we know that parents and caregivers need lots of different things to help to make sure that their families thrive. But the one through line that is true for all parents and caregivers is that they want their families to live well, to be the healthiest lives they can possibly have, and to be successful in their endeavors. So we really feel like it's important in order for us to get to that goal of really ensuring that parents and caregivers are heard and really valued by the systems that are intended to support them. And it's really by listening to parents and caregivers that we can actually hope to address and eliminate barriers that exist and historic inequities that are baked into our systems that really create those barriers. Second, when we start by asking what is best for children and families, we really are optimistic that we can help to disrupt the status quo and shift power over time. We also know that it's one thing for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to fund organizations to do this work, but it's another thing and another undertaking for us to actually try to be in relationship and in partnership with parents and caregivers directly. So that's part of the reason why we created our Family Advisory Committee, which is very much connected to the programming that Indi talked about in my introduction. We know that the closer we get to families, the closer we get to caregivers, the closer we're going to get to solutions and actions.
Thank you, Monica. And I got so excited. I skipped over my dear colleague, Parker, who I want to have jump in on this before we circle back to some of the points you made. Parker.
Yes. Hello, everyone, and it is great to be here. So a couple points that I'll make really quickly about why is it important, just reflecting on my work. Engaging people with lived experience at the bottom line is just, we really have to engage those who are closest to the problem and the curation of a solution. I mean, it really is that simple. I originally started my career, everybody at CLASP knows, social services. And so engaging people directly has always been a deep, intricate part of my career, and the lens that I wanted to bring from my previous work to CLASP, and has totally shaped my entire perspective just around advocacy and what actually brought me to the policy advocacy work. And I think it's really important to me that bringing lived experience into the policy and advocacy work is how we, in a way that we ensure that it's not just transactional, that it's engaging, that it builds deep relationships over time, right? And for us on our team, it has totally shifted the way that we've thought about policy. So we've moved from just focusing on what is possible to moving to what is right? Not just centering policies and ideas that we feel would get done, but really centering the things that people have said, this is what matters most to my life, and this is what is going to help me to live, thrive, and achieve the life that I desire. And really centering that and making sure that we move forward in that direction, and really allow ourselves to be checked and allow ourselves to recognize that we don't have all the answers, Sway. Okay. So yes, I'll pass it on.
That's great, Parker. Thank you. And yes, I think it's always important to start with what people say they need. I think folks have sort of partly answered this, but if anyone else wants to say more, we got a story from Parker about how this approach has become integrated into her work and where it came from. Monica, you talked a little about that too. And, you know, Alex, I'm sort of curious about whether it's your work or the administration's work. How did this notion of directly engaging folks who are most impacted and who have lived experience, sort of why and how did it become part of the overall agenda and strategy, again, both for yourself and certainly your time in the administration? And we'll see if others want to pile on.
Sure. So I'll start with the work in the administration. And as folks on this call may know, one of the first executive orders that President Biden signed on day one of the administration was responding to the groundswell of support for pushing and advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities across the country. And what that looked like was a charge to each agency to look hard at its policies and programs and understand where they were falling short, particularly for communities that had experienced discrimination, exclusion, marginalization before, and then take steps to address them. And one of the major priorities that came out of that stream of work that I had the opportunity to work on while I was in the administration was around making sure that we were centering the input from those communities that had experienced historical marginalization, discrimination, and exclusion in the kind of priority setting that agencies were doing as we were trying to assess these barriers and burdens and then address them. And as we were doing that, we heard from many community partners, folks on this call, that the processes that we have right now for public engagement often have really high barriers. So right now, when a federal agency is contemplating a change to a rule that governs, say, SNAP or Social Security, it has to go out to the public, and anyone in the public has an opportunity to submit a comment, and the agency has to take those comments into consideration as it's thinking about the final proposal it's going to put out to the public. But in practice, a very small fraction of the public actually participates. And it tends to be folks who are already advantaged, particularly businesses who know how to navigate this process. And so this is a real big missed opportunity. If we can get more folks participating through those mechanisms, through others, voicing their views on the things that they care about, the burdens that they experience, and how these programs affect them on a day-to-day basis, I think we can do a lot more to address those burdens that you flagged at the top, Indi, and reorient government in a way that will be more responsive to everyone.
I mean, there's a way in which it sort of shifts some of the balance of power and levels the playing field by doing this actively. I don't know if others want to add more. Andrea, you talked about how you've seen what happens when young people get engaged. And Ms. Rose, you've obviously been involved in a number of different ways. But if anyone sort of wants to jump in more on the sort of why and how this has become so integrated into the work you do, I'm sure we'd all benefit. But as you all thinking about that, you're welcome to come off mute. Let me sort of ask, maybe starting with you, Andrea, if you could sort of share some of your experiences when you work with a national policy group, because you might think, well, what's the point of a national policy group doing this? Although, you know, Alex talked about getting involved in the regulatory process, which of course is a heavy lift for just normal human beings, but less so maybe for businesses, as you said. But what's the value of your engagement with the National Policy Advocacy Organization? What are some of the highlights you've seen collaborating in this way?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I started off locally, started off working in my local government, working in clubs, student organizations, and then kind of leveled up to national policy very, very quickly. I think some of the benefits of getting involved is not only seeing it on a smaller scale, but being able to see it on a larger scale, how it affects people nationwide. I think sometimes we're kind of stuck within our bubble and not really understanding the lives of different people across the country, because we're not seeing, we only see people like us. And so having that more broad in perspective is important. For me personally, being able to see national immigration policy and being able to be a part of that decision making, or being able to voice myself and being able to share my story, was very empowering, something that I never felt would be a crucial aspect of policy making. I found that there was a lot of power within telling my story, because not only do you get people to understand why this matters, but you really share a perspective that's been hidden for so long.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's not just us, almost any community these days, people find themselves in bubbles and don't talk to people who aren't like them. So I really appreciate that perspective, Andrea. Ms. Rose, do you want to sort of add to your experience with UPlan or others?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm sure we don't have enough time to really say all that I can say about this piece of it. But so let me start with UPlan, United Parent Leaders Action Network. So first of all, the collaboration starts at home, because we have well over 36 organizations from across the country that are a part of UPlan, and they're parent-led organizations, which is important because those are the folks on the ground. Those are the folks that are living these issues that we're often sitting at tables to talk about and having conversations about. And so the collaboration within there has been most beneficial, because we get to hear from each other what's happening from state to state, because it looks different across the country in some areas. Even though we're working on the same issue, there could be different dynamics within that issue. So that's one of the most illustrious, I would say, collaborations. Then let me lift CLASP as another exciting partnership or system that has been beneficial to parents. Because as Alex was talking and I was thinking about, he's absolutely correct. But what happens most of the time is that folks on the ground don't know when that comment period is. They don't know a lot of the ins and outs. And so they can't partake in something that they don't have information about. And I think that CLASP has done an amazing job at making sure that we know that we understand how policy is moving, what the impact is, and what it really means to us. And even so far as breaking it down as what it can mean from state to state, because that can be very confusing. But I think even outside of that, we've developed relationship with policymakers around different legislation that we wanted to move forward in. We've developed relationship with funders. I think about the funders group who, in conjunction with U Plan, develop a toolkit to really help funders think about this being more of a partnership than a hierarchy. Thinking about that power dynamic, thinking about looking at things from an equity lens, and making sure that as a funder, that is what they're doing. It has 4 domains, and each of those domains help them take a deeper dive into their organization, whether or not it be an organization with a board or an organization that has a sole owner or a family-led organization, so on and so forth. And so within that, I think the main thing that I could lift here is partnership is so important, but parents make great partners. And the folks that on the ground in communities, which is mostly comprised of parents, families, and communities, um, really are the best partners that you can have because they're living it. Because I am an expert in my own life, such as all of you are. I am an expert in my children's lives. And most of the time, we're experts in our community because that's our day to day. And so we have the answers, we have the solutions. It's whether or not people are willing to respect that we are those experts that we're lifting that we are.
As well said, and it kind of reminds me of how virtually every news outlet in this country will automatically see like a local small business owner as an expert on the economy. So it just that's a cultural shift, right? It doesn't have to be that way, but why aren't you seen as an expert on the economy if you're a worker? So I think I want to see if Parker and Monica, if you want to sort of jump in on this question of sort of the potential benefits, Monica.
Yeah, I just wanted to express such appreciation for the toolkit, Ms. Rose, you were just talking about. I would say for us at RWJF, it was almost a roadmap for us, to uncover not just the moral reasons of why we should be partnering with parents and families, but I will be very candid and say the really practical reason of when we are designing interventions, things to fund, initiatives to do, by listening and understanding the intersectional lives that parents, families live, it helps us to design programs and work that is actually addresses multiple layers of that intersectionality and really examine, all the nuances that we all as individuals in this nation, we live nuanced lives. And I think for too often foundations, have identify a solution A and find a solution B or fund a solution B. And what this work I'm working with parents and families directly has helped us to understand, you got to find solution A, B, C, and D. And you got to realize that these all live and exist at the same time in everyone's lives. So I think it's not just like the moral and important partnership and to throw hierarchy out, but it also makes the programming and the funding more efficient, responsive, and actually being able to impact the lives of those that we're hoping to uphold.
Thank you for bringing that in, Monica, and Sneak, the toolkit have that effect on you all. Parker, want to jump in on this?
Yes, I would love to jump in. I think, first off, thank you so much, Ms. Rose, and also Andrea, for what you all brought up. I think it's super duper important that when you are closest to what's happening and it's happening in your life, it's your everyday, you have more stake in the ground, honestly. And you really know what is best for yourself and what is important. And it really just brings a vibrance and a zest to our work and partnerships. And then one thing that I wanted to double down on, because it is such a zest and a vibrance and such an amazing perspective. It really is important, and like I said earlier, of the engagement over a longer period of time, not just engaging folks when it comes to we take you on the hill and that's it, and we never engage with you again, right? Or not just engagement in terms of I'm going to do a focus group with you and I don't follow up with you and I just extract and it's more transactional, right? But really making sure that it's something that is built over time, that it is something that we are engaged in each other, right? That if you're asking me a question that may not be in my wheelhouse, and I'm not a lawyer and I can't help you with this, but I'm being a bridge for you so that I can help you, whatever resources we have as a national organization, even if we just have relationships, that we're using that to be transactional for the folks that we're engaging with, so that it's not just that we're continuously pulling from them and replicating some of the harms that have happened before. And so one thing that we really are moving to considering, we've had our community partnership group, which has been amazing, and they're awesome. And now, since we've exchanged so many wonderful things with each other, they're off doing beautiful things. And so having that long-term engagement, but also the opportunity to engage more and more folks through a cohort model, where folks will be able to come in for three years plus, but as they elevate and want to do other things, they have the resources that we've equipped them with and that they've equipped us with that we've learned from. So just wanted to share that.
That's great, Parker. And there's sort of a bit of community building and all of that, right? And a bit of just treating people as people, which I think is core to this work. So we all fall short sometimes. And I do want to shift to talking about some of the challenges. This work can be hard. And we can make mistakes with the best intentions, as we know. So I'm sort of curious, Parker, if you could sort of kick us off here and others can jump in. What have been some of the challenges and how have you sort of addressed them as you've undertaken this work?
Absolutely. I'll talk from a couple of different angles, but I'll start with just some of the challenges overall are the mental and the just physical things that experiencing poverty can bring to you, the trauma, right? And having to work in a space where you're talking about some of the most hurtful things that have happened to you, whether you are talking about your own experiences, because we try to steer clear of that. If you do not want to talk about your experience, that you don't have to, honey, okay? You don't have to tell your story at all. But we do like to ensure that people are engaging in the policy work in a way that they feel really deeply invested in. But if this is something that's happening in your everyday life, that's hurtful. And so dealing with the trauma has definitely been a challenge and definitely something that is comprehensive and is deep and takes a lot of empathy, right? Another thing that I would mention is dealing with, and I think we phased out of this a little bit, that most organizations know that this is necessary work, but we still do come across folks who are like, well, how is this important to my work? How does this make sense? Or coming across folks who feel challenged that their policy work couldn't stand up against, someone with lived experience, where we're partnering together, right? We're not in competition with one another. And the last thing that I would mention as well is funding. My goodness, okay. Funding. We know that philanthropy heavily guides the policy space. We know that we exist within currently just a structure and a system that has existed for a very long time. And funders oftentimes are the ones who set the priorities for our space. And a lot of times when they're setting the priorities for our space, they're doing it in a way where they're having conversations to themselves and not necessarily engaging with other organizations, grassroots organizations, or community members whatsoever, right? They're having these conversations about, this is the next best thing. This is going to be hot. This is what we're going to fund, and we're going to tell you how to do it. That doesn't work. And that definitely doesn't work in community, right? Community, we allow ourselves a space to be guided by them, to have conversations, for things to happen in a less structured manner. And that's not how things have been done in the philanthropy world. So that has definitely been a challenge for us, I would say, specifically.
Thank you, Parker. That's really helpful. Let me continue to have folks discuss some of the challenges and how they've tried to overcome them. I'll turn to you, Alex, before going to Ms. Rose.
Sure. So maybe I can share a little bit about what I saw about the challenges inside of the government to orienting to this kind of engagement, even when there's a lot of excitement about trying to do this kind of work. I'd say historically, the government has taken very much a hands-off reactive approach to engagement, often one-off, not continuous, and often on a pretty limited time scale. Agencies want an answer to X, and can you get it to us in 3 weeks? And then you don't necessarily hear from them again. And for all of the reasons that Ms. Rose and Parker laid out, this is not a great approach to building deep relationships of trust, meaningful engagement for folks who have experienced marginalization, discrimination, and exclusion, may have barriers to participation. And it means that the structures of engagement that we have, like for instance, being able to comment on proposed regulations or proposed grants, they tend to work well for those folks who already have resources and already know how to navigate the system. But there's good news. The good news is agencies are experimenting with new kinds of approaches that are trying to change this older, hands-off, very reactive, limited mode of engagement. I'd say one of the really promising practices that I've seen is agencies saying that in order to be fair in the process of public engagement, we actually have to proactively reach out to folks who we don't think would participate otherwise. Historically, agencies have been reluctant to do that because they said, if we proactively reach out to community X, we're worried that we'll be seen as being unfair. But if you don't take action to do that kind of proactive outreach, you're not going to hear from them, and that's also unfair. So I'd say that's one positive practice. The second positive practice is, to Parker, your point, actually making money available to overcome these barriers, whether it's childcare at community consultations that agencies hold, whether it's investing in translation of agency outreach materials so that more folks can understand it, or whether it's investing in partnerships with community intermediaries that have those trusted relationships with the communities you're trying to reach. All of those takes resources and time, but they can really yield payoffs if you're able to allocate it in that way. And maybe the last thing I'll share is that I find particularly exciting are ways of building in community engagement like this on the front end into program design. I'd point, for instance, to the Department of Housing and Urban Development that has a really innovative grant program aimed at addressing problems faced by youth experienced homelessness, where they actually require that applicants consult with youth with that kind of experience in designing the grant, and then they become part of the governance structure of the grant going forward. And I think it would be just really fantastic to think about more of those experiments that we could be seeding across the government. I mean, imagine, for instance, if unemployed workers were part of the consultation for running and administering parts of the unemployment insurance system, so you could have that engagement and folks would be compensated for their time in a way that it just doesn't exist right now. So as you can tell, I'm very excited about the opportunities for these pilots, but I think it's very promising.
I love that enthusiasm. A quick point. You mentioned translation of materials. Did you mean translation in English to something that's understandable, or different languages, or both?
Actually, that's a great question. I had meant translation into other languages, but I think you raised an excellent point that plain language is so important. And actually, legally, most agencies have to be translating their materials into plain language, but often that plain language is even indecipherable to those of us who are in the weeds on some of these subjects. So there's much more to do there.
Great, thanks. Glad to ask. And Ms. Rose, before I turn it to Andrea.
Oh boy, these questions are really fully loaded. So challenges, so let me not repeat everything that's been said so far, absolutely. And I want to kind of focus in on the importance of respect, or the lack thereof would be the challenge. That we are all human beings and we all have our level of brilliance, whether or not you've got a number of letters behind your name, or whether or not you have championed life. For example, I am an expert on surviving cancer because I survived stage 4 cancer. And other folks have levels of expertise. And we have to respect that because it's all an intricate part of this really good gumbo we could make. And so respect would be one of the challenges. But I would also have us really, in every entity, whether it be governmental or funders, or even us as we're trying to readapt or reimagine policy and reform, or whatever it is that people endeavor to do to make things better, thinking about the unintended consequences, because that's huge. Because oftentimes, in the effort to try to make things better, we could possibly be making it very challenging for someone else who has a different issue. And this is the ultimate reason why the voice of lived experience, the voice of youth, the voice of the elderly, the voice of people who are impacted by whatever issue you are working on, it is crucial that their voice is there so that we aren't faced with those unintended consequences, because they're there to say, if you do this, this is what will happen to me. So that would be the main challenge I would lift, that oftentimes in our efforts, we have to really be intentional about the impact to everyone concerned.
That is so true. And before I turn it over to Andrea, we just encourage folks to use the Q&A function, as we actually might have a good bit of time for Q&A. Everyone's been so powerful with every word they've chosen that we're having a great discussion and moving along really at a healthy pace. Let me just so folks know, this is separate from the chat function. You can find it usually under the three dots where it says more at the bottom of your Zoom screen, and you can use the Q&A function there. But let me turn to Andrea to talk a little about challenges and how you've seen them overcome or worked to overcome them before I jump to Monica.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to kind of just emphasize what everyone has said thus far. I want to turn back to a point that Parker made earlier about burnout and mental health. I think there's a lot of power in storytelling. However, I think oftentimes we accidentally slip between the lines of finding that power and exploiting that. A lot of this work stems from personal trauma, because when it's all said and done, when we're having these conversations with lawmakers, it's us folks that have to go back home and still continue to deal with these experiences. And I've experienced it myself. There's a lot of burnout, and we want to make sure that we have people at the table who are centering their lived experiences within policy, but at the same time, we also want to make sure that at the end of the day, we're not putting this expectation of carrying all this weight on the same people who are being impacted. I think another issue we find is getting people to stay engaged in the long term, especially young people. I think it becomes particularly difficult when we don't see the production from the work that we put in right away. And I know for me personally, I become very disheartened and discouraged, and I'm like, God, there's no point in this. I'm not seeing the results right now. And we're not continuing to have that outreach, and depending on the same people within an organization to carry all this weight, there's a lot of burnout with that. So I think something that's very important and essential in this work is centering it back to our mental health, our wellness, because that is power, that is community building, that is part of this entire process. If we're not well, we can't produce these results that we want.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying that, Andrea. People can pour their hearts and souls into the work and not see results. When you said production, I wanted to see if you felt comfortable saying a little more. Some of it sounds like might be actual impacts and results. Some of it may be even just what is the immediate output of doing this, partnering with folks. Is that fair? Or do you want to say a little more about what that production that folks often don't see is to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, in my personal experience, when I've worked in campaigns and we're talking to lawmakers and we're spending hours and hours drafting policy, having these meetings, and then seeing none of that go to place, seeing none of the legislation pass, seeing court cases fail, seeing, just a lot of these issues that we see going on and nothing being done, and we can become very impatient because we feel like we're doing so much work, and then a bill could easily die on the floor. Or we see that we make millions and millions of calls to voters, and then we still don't see the outcomes that we want. So it's draining work, and especially during campaign season when you're putting so much of your time, and a lot of it is volunteer work. You see a lot of, I think, sometimes exploitative patterns, because we're so focused on getting this done that we don't realize that the people who are doing this work are impacted. And now not only are we draining them, but we're not even focused on the actual goal.
Yeah, definitely resonates. I'm sure with everyone here. And there's lots of fundamental uncertainty in doing the work, and there's folks who are organized against the work that we're trying to do. So it's very challenging. So the focus on mental well-being, I think, really is important for the long haul for some of these fights. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Andrea. Monica, would you like to talk a little about some of the challenges and how you all have worked to address them?
Yeah, again, just so appreciate hearing the challenges that have been raised, because I would just echo many of those. How we build in time for self-care, rest, and healing spaces. I'm going to say, friends, it's a pretty hard thing to do when you're developing a foundation meeting agenda. It's an easy task to undertake. But I also want to bring in a couple of process challenges we've had in working and directly engaging our family advisory committee, creating new ways of working. So we have in all of our meetings, we address and want to respond to any types of accessibility barriers. Of course, we also have always wanted to respond and make sure any dietary restrictions are something that we're adjusting and accommodating for in our meetings. But it wasn't until our family advisory committee, we pulled these this group of 12 amazing parents and caregivers across the country to come together that we realized we didn't have caregiving guidelines. We weren't paying caregiving costs. We weren't acknowledging all of that time, energy, effort to plan for care, to provide care, etc. And so we rectified that. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it's the guidelines that meet all needs, but it is something that we realized, we don't necessarily have the processes in place at RWJF to actually engage directly with individuals. And the second quick thing I'll say is our honorarium structure. Our honorarium structure was very much arranged by the type of organization we were giving the honorarium to. We didn't even have an honorarium structure for individuals. What do you do when you leave blank? The name of the organization, it broke our systems internally. We didn't know how to do it. So we've made a lot of changes. We've now are really trying to not just honor and respect and pay for the time of those that we are engaging with, but actually to re-examine lots of our broken systems inside the foundation, and how can we teach other foundations to not make the same mistakes we have.
I appreciate that, Monica. Thank you for being candid about those challenges. We are going to have some time for questions, and I see a few have come in, but actually the second question by an anonymous attendee pretty much aligns with the final question I was going to ask all panelists, which is, what are the lessons you've learned in doing this work, and what advice would you offer national organizations, policymakers, community partners, philanthropies, et cetera, seeking to advance such collaborations? And because Ms. Rose, you volunteered to answer a version of this on relationship building and making that less transactional, would you mind kicking us off?
No, I volunteered, but okay. Sure. So I want to say that we've talked a lot about trust, and that's always got to be at the forefront, but sometimes that has to be built. So I think coming to the table, or whatever entity or community, forthright, in all earnest. And what I mean by that, don't come in making all these promises that you can't keep. Be honest about what you can do and what you can't do. Have those conversations. Be open to hear the tough things in the room. Be open to hear really how we got there. What are some things that it's going to take to get us to the next level? Be open to hear those hard conversations that may very well come from said community, but it is also the catalyst to move forward and to do great things in partnership with that community. So I think having the mindset to come in, being honest, being willing to build trust, being willing to repair harm that's been caused on whatever level you can, and having real partnership, real relationship. Those things are the monumental pieces that rebuild trust and help us all win together. Everybody wins when we do it that way.
Thank you, Ms. Rose. I like scenarios where everyone wins. Let me turn to you, Parker, and Alex. I'm going to try to get you in before you have to leave. But Parker, what advice would you give from your many lessons learned?
Yes, absolutely. So I would start with, don't get stuck in analysis paralysis. My wonderful colleague, Jessie, talks about this all the time. So yes, you should do research and your due diligence before getting started, but do not dig yourself so deep into a hole that you never do anything, because that eventually is worse, right? We know that this is work that we need to get into. So figure out how you're going to jump in and get started. And the reality is that just like Ms. Rose said, we will get things wrong. Accept it. I just want everybody to take a pause and say, I'm wrong. Oh, it's okay. It's okay. It is totally fine that you will get things wrong. What people are looking for is not perfection. They're looking for transparency. They're looking for authenticity, and they're looking for a willingness for you to equitably atone for your shortcomings and make tangible changes, right? And also pay people. We talk about this all the time, but pay people for their time comprehensively and equitably. So cover travel, per diem, ground transportation, childcare, and do it in a way that people do not have to pay first and then be reimbursed. That system, no, we can't do that to people. Also, use systems. We love Ethnio. It has changed our lives. Oh my goodness. Because it can pay people immediately in a way that they choose. They can be paid through an Amazon gift card. They can be paid through direct deposit. They can be paid any way they desire. And it's great for people specifically who are unbanked, or who don't, or maybe they just want an Amazon gift card. I mean, hey, who doesn't like Amazon? Do what you like, right? And also incorporating funds into your budget for emergencies. One thing that we know is that an emergency is the quickest thing to send someone deeper into poverty. If folks are working along with our organizations, that should never be happening. And I don't always like saying never, but I'm saying it today. That should never happen. That people are in tandem with us, having conversations with us, working with us, and something happened in their lives that they're sent more deeply into poverty and we couldn't do anything about it. No. So we need to have emergency funds for that, right? And reevaluate all of your administrative practices overall. And also budget and invest in restorative justice and trauma-informed care resources. You don't necessarily have to have someone on staff. That would be great. I hope that that's something we can one day move to, but invest in knowing a resource and being a bridge to be able to guide people to that resource when doing this work. So those are some of the top items that I would mention.
Thank you, Parker. And Alex, feel free to use up the next few minutes. We have more time after. We want you to answer this question. If you see anything in the Q&A or the chat that speaks to you, please feel free to weave that in.
Sure, thanks. So just reflecting on where policymakers in government should be thinking about investing time and experimentation, I think understanding how to build the internal muscle to be able to have the kind of resources, alignment, and coordination necessary for doing engagement. And that starts with, for instance, being able to compensate people for their time, which is not something that government is used to. And similar to Monica's experience, I think in government, we need to build those muscles and routines for making this just part of what we budget for when we're standing up a new program or running a consultation. And I would look to the Department of Health and Human Services, for instance, for some really exciting experimentation there. They've started a new technical assistance center for their agencies that administer health programs, human services programs, to understand how to do this kind of engagement that starts with supporting individuals and engaging in a non-transactional way over time, and are trying to build that internal muscle that will last past this administration. Government also needs to help build the external muscle too. And I would point to the Environmental Protection Agency, which has a really exciting grant program for thriving communities, where they're giving grants to local communities to build long-term muscle for engaging with state government, local government, the federal government, so that it's not a one-off thing. It's saying, we're going to be here, we're investing these resources and building a relationship and building that capacity to be able to, see regulatory proposals and understand how to be able to comment on them, or come to town halls equipped with the kind of information that could help shape these proposals. So that's on the policymaker side. And I think for organizations, I would recommend finding opportunities to partner with folks who have had experience working through these processes for consultation before, and learning from them. While I was in government, I saw some organizations like worker centers, the restaurant opportunity centers, for instance, that build a partnership with Democracy Forward that's has much more legal muscle and experience working through the regulatory process. And they were able to use that partnership to help bring some of the workers that they interact with to offer comments on regulations and activities at the Department of Labor that were under consideration. So that kind of partnership where you can bring folks who have the tools and resources that one group may lack, I think is a really productive way forward. I'm so sorry that I have to leave. I have to go teach, but I've really appreciated this conversation. I've learned a lot, and will be really excited to download and hear what I miss after I have to log off.
Thank you, Alex. Good luck teaching, but thanks for all you've done to contribute to the conversation and the underlying work. I really think that we've made more progress in the last few years than in any time in recent memory. Thank you. And let me turn it to you, Monica, to jump in on this before I turn to Andrea. And you've already provided, I think, some guidance and advice, but especially, I think, for your philanthropic peers. But I'm curious what else you might add to that.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Again, I would just underscore something that I heard Ms. Rose say. These have to be ongoing relationships, right? This isn't just about like a one time, we're doing this one thing and we want your input about this one time. To develop trust and relationships, you got to be in it for the long haul. And you also have to be very committed to, I would say, from the philanthropic side of things, to gather input and feedback across all stages of the work. So not just in the, hey, what's your ideas and how do we develop new ideas, but what's the design of how we do this, and what happens in the implementation phase, and how do we actually make adjustments to make sure the impact and the implementation is actually equitable. So the ongoing piece. I want to elevate something I heard Parker say. I often think about progress. We're striving for progress, not perfection, right? There's lots of things that we need to continue to adjust and address in the foundation, but there's also things that we're recognizing and realizing that we have things that we need to improve upon and adjust. And then the third and final thing is, we've been talking so much about hosting spaces and building relationships to have these conversations. I think that's, of course, critically important, but I also think it's not just important to have a conversation that shifts from what's the matter with you to what matters to you, but actually shifting the conversation from the so what to here's what. So what you said, and here's what we're able to do. I think it's building on what Ms. Rose was saying, when we get feedback around a range of different issues, if they're out of scope for what we're funding at the foundation, essentially not connected to undoing structural racism or about health equity, then I have to be very candid and say, I really appreciate that. I really value that. We're not the foundation that can be working on that, but here's 4 other groups that I hope can. That's another important part that foundations can play, is that connector and that introductory role. So those are the pieces that I would say: ongoing progress, not perfection. And you got to have feedback loops. It can't be a one-way conversation of like, let's extract from you and then not tell you what we're doing with it.
Very helpful, Monica. Thank you for that perspective. Andrea, what sort of advice would you give?
Yeah, absolutely. Just listening to what everyone has said thus far. I think part of the lessons I've learned comes from being the person directly impacted. So not so much being like the national partner or collaborating, but more so getting the chance to be part of the table, part of the conversation. In that sense, I've learned a lot about when to step back from the work, whether it's because I've become burnout or because I'm acknowledging that there's no more contributions to be made on my own part. And this is very difficult because none of us, I think, when you've worked on something for so long, you're like, no, I'm an expert at this, and it's your passion, but it's knowing when to take a step back and let the next generation take the lead. And I think that's the difficulty we may be having right now with young people and those in office. I also think that, like what's been said before, we kind of get lost within the vision when we're working amongst other national partners, and it kind of becomes a competition of who can get the most funding or who's at the front lines and who's speaking at this event, who's speaking at that, who's having these meetings with legislators. So knowing that we're all working towards the same goal and encouraging these partnerships rather than kind of going at each other and creating a division amongst one another.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thinking about how you mentioned, look, how important it is to know when to sort of step back. We had a question. It accidentally got shifted to the answered category, but I'm going to start with Parker and then come back to you, Andrea, and then see if Ms. Rose and Monica want to jump in. But on thoughts folks have about how to engage folks who recognize that policy matters, but they feel defeated or have lost faith when it comes to the potential for policy change. Parker, do you want to jump in on that first?
Yes, absolutely. I think number one, recognizing that it really is hard when you've worked really hard at something and it doesn't come through, and allowing the space to have that conversation. And this is why it's so important to have ongoing engagement with folks and having places for discussion, not only where we're getting work done and we're working on this policy, but also to have discussion about this sucks and I don't like it. And allowing a space for transparency about, what happened, why it happened, and then allowing the space for people to take their time to want to move forward. And some people may need the space where they have to step away, just like Andrea said. And some people need that moment and then they're able to get back into it. But what I've seen that I do not recommend folks have done before is, well, we'll just work on safer things. Right? We'll work on things that we know will get done. We'll work on things that won't cause that type of pain and that type of rejection. And that's not the answer that most folks are looking for at all. This is a hard moment, and being able to sit with a hard moment as a person. And sometimes that's hard when usually in work, you're meant to be professional. And we do a lot of fighting back against professionalism in our space, especially with our community partnership group, right? But you're supposed to put on this front of like, we're moving on to the next win. But no, allow people space to be in their feelings about something, that this not passing may mean something very deep in their lives for a long time. And really have empathy for that and allow someone to go through their own experience with it, and don't try to rush them through it, right? And this is why it's so important not to just have these so structured spaces where we have to move on because we have something else to do. And so that's what I would say. Being there for people and being empathetic. This work takes a lot of work outside of work hours. I am on the phone texting folks, calling, "Hi, your babies, what's going on? Talk to me." We not even talking about policy. We talking about your personal life, because that's important too, right? Totally not what we would consider professional. Is human. And that's what's important for people to be able to get past and move forward in their own time, right? So that's just what I would say.
Really great. I appreciate you, especially bringing in the fact that it's important to engage people outside of the policy context that might be the reason why you initially connected or the sort of core to the relationship. But we're all much more than that. Andrea, do you want to say a little more there? And I also noticed someone asked about generational sort of fundamental challenges when young people tend to distrust folks of previous generations. So I guess both questions to you. How do you overcome that, if you can? And how, again, would you really help people through what are very tough fights that inevitably mean some losses and some very painful consequential losses?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in typical Gen Z fashion, I just kind of want to retweet what Parker said. Just spot on everything. But I do think that this work is very personal. It stems from a lot of trauma. It's very draining. And I think it's not your typical 9-to-5 job. It's something that really takes a lot out of you. And oftentimes when we become so engulfed in the work and it's personal, it becomes our complete identity. And I think that's where we have to draw some boundaries of, okay, this work is very important to me, but it's also my job. But I also am another person outside of this. I have friends, I have family, and that's also feeding my soul. And that's also self-care. And that's part of the work. I also think, as well as what Parker said, I think sometimes we focus on, okay, well, we can't really fix this right now, so let's focus on minor issues. And that's not necessarily working on our goals. We're stuck in a repetitive cycle where we're not really accomplishing what we want to do. And it's also not producing the results we want to see. So I think my advice would be to people who are in this work is not only taking care of yourself and knowing when to take a step back, but also fighting the battles that you want, knowing when to pick and choose and knowing what to put your energy into, and also realizing that you're not going to win every single battle in terms of policy, but there is hope, and there is hope within our next generation. And it takes a lot of outreach and not just focusing on the same people who are already within the realm of policy, but also making that effort to connect with other populations, other communities, especially younger people.
Thank you, Andrea. And Ms. Rose or Monica, do you want to add? Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Rose.
Yeah, I absolutely appreciate this question. And Parker covered most of it, and I know we're ending, so let me say my appreciation for being on a call with such champions, such brilliance. Andrea, I have not learned the lesson that you've been teaching today, because this is heart's work. And I'm also one who's most impacted by a lot of these issues. And so for me, it is necessary to be at those tables. But I think it takes all of us. And oftentimes we allow other people to separate us and to put us in buckets and pockets. But it takes the young, the old, the middle-aged, the folks who've been there for a long time that can tell us the challenges that they faced, the newer folks that can have some insight after knowing how we failed and what we can do to be better the next time. And this question kind of dives into all of that. Kofi's training, and I'm also a Kofi trainer, has us to look at each challenge as a new opportunity. And what we do is we turn that obstacle into a new goal. So I want to encourage the person who lifted this question, that I know that it gets overwhelming. Sometimes I'm on 2 different calls at a time. I'm running from one meeting to the next. I have all these health issues. I'm taking care of my mom. There's a lot. But at the end of the day, it's okay to prioritize, as Andrea's been lifting, and it's okay to take space, whatever that looks like for you. But it's also okay to take that issue that seems to be failing and create a new goal around it, create a new approach, create a new direction. Because at the end of the day, my philosophy is we have to win. And so whatever that looks like, however you get there, I encourage you to champion and keep pressing until you are spelling VICTORY.
You're here. Sometimes wins can beget other wins. So we actually do have some time. But I want to see, Monica, if you want to chime in on this, and otherwise, if folks want to look at the questions and see if, again, anything in particular speaks to them or anything you want to lift up in the chat. But Monica, do you want to say
Well,
something
just
here?
a connected part of, I've been in philanthropy for 8 years. Next week is my anniversary. And I have seen some dramatic changes over this time in the field of philanthropy. One thing that it continues to come up, which warms my heart and feeds my soul, is this piece around centering lived experience. There's a big movement around equitable grant making and becoming an equitable philanthropy and et cetera. And inevitably, whatever call I join, whatever conversation I join, it's always about how it's the challenges of how to get more proximal to the work, how to get closer to individuals who are living the burdens of our historic barriers, that are living the policy challenges, that are living their intersectional lives, like how to do that and how to do it differently than the way philanthropy normally does, which is give a grant to an amazing organization like CLASP to go off and create a group that does that, right? Like we can do that and we should continue to do that. There's a huge role for us to continue to do that. And how do we bring those experiences into the policy and advocacy realm? Like that's another shift that I'm seeing. I don't know if my friends and on this call are also seeing this, but we've moved away from doing advocacy like, hey, go find the people to deliver the talking points that you are creating, to how do we actually have the people, please, if you're not on audio, I'm using air quotes here, to actually be the creators of the messages, the announcers of the news, and the deliverers of the of what it is that we need to change, instead of what has traditionally been the other way around. So that gives me more, hope. It gives me optimism that philanthropy is changing. I feel like national advocacy is changing. But there's a tremendous amount that we still have to do to figure out how to bridge and guide these worlds around organizing and policy and advocacy in a way that doesn't feel like they're side gigs of either one. So I just want to, it's not exactly on the question, Indi, but I just want to get that in there.
Really, you say whatever you want to say. And, I grew up in the Deep South in Georgia, and we haven't talked too much about this, but some of what you were saying, what Ms. Rose was saying, and even Parker and Andrea made me think about how the folks there know, the folks who share our values, they know how to talk very differently about things than maybe the same folks in Chicago, where I also lived, or in DC, and they know the pains of losing. They know sometimes what they think it needs is necessary to win. So there's also, I think, a geographic variation that was sort of coming to my mind as you were talking, Monica, where to truly build an equitable society, especially in our federal system, we have to win in some tough places. And I think it's possible. It's not easy, but all the more reason to actually engage people from those communities, or really sometimes get out of the way and let them do their thing. But let me suggest that I let everyone sort of, again, read the chat, read the Q&A questions, pick something. We'll just go Parker, Andrea, Monica, and Ms. Rose to sort of close out before I just say 30 seconds at the end. And let me flag for folks. I think we can follow up in an email with some of these resources, but we've got great resources. I see, Monica, from your colleague, Dwayne. Alma Issa has been doing a fantastic job getting UPlan's info into the chat. Terrific partners of ours, as I mentioned, all around, and Ms. Rose obviously representing there. We have a great article from Alex that just came out today. I don't know if that's coincidence or not, but hot off the presses, that touches on some of these issues, and we dropped that in earlier. I know we have friends here from Hunger Free America. They've done some great work. The toolkits have come up a lot. So there's some things to share there, but folks should feel free to use the chat, drop things in. We're going to change the order though. Okay, so we'll go, we'll actually do, we'll do Andrea, Monica, Ms. Rose, and then Parker. Sorry, so Andrea, whatever you want to say, please take us away.
Is there a particular question or just closing thoughts?
Just closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, this conversation has been amazing to hear different perspectives. So thank you so much for having me. I think there's a lot of reflection going on in my head right now about how to proceed within the movement, how to collaborate and have these partnerships in a way that is fruitful for all parties involved and doesn't drain the community out and gets people involved. And, to your point, Ms. Rose, having everyone at the table involved is so crucial, not just the young people, but the people who've been in this movement for years and years. And that's something that's very essential. There's so many lessons that can be learned from those who have been doing this work before I was even born. So I think it's important and it's beautiful to do this kind of work and to build that trust within the community and build that bridge between those who do not have necessarily the access to what's going on, and building that bridge of communication is something that I will continue to work on and continue to advocate for.
Well, wonderful, Andrea, and thank you again for joining us. So I misread my chat. We can actually go to Parker, Monica. I'll let Ms. Rose close this out, and please just weave in any answers to questions that people have asked or questions that you want to answer that no one's asked. So go ahead, Parker.
Me, okay. I'll weave in two questions. I know I see a question about speaking to capitalism and how it has shaped our democracy. There are quotes around democracy, and how community has always organized, however, their voices are not heard because of the way money flows in our politics. And I'll also answer the question about that someone mentioned. Folks are not able to organize or concentrate on one big goal, and how can we organize and convince them of that need? So in terms of talking about, I like that both of these highlight organizing, because I think that is super important. Capitalism is a thing. We live in a capitalistic society, right? It is a reality that we do have to face. And it is a reality that one thing we've noticed in our work, we are the ones who are employed 40 hours a week. We are engaging with folks that we're trying to partner with, and their time is, they don't have the time that we have because they also have jobs, they also have children, they also have so many other things, right? And what does that look like oftentimes, where the engagement is just not equitable, just based on the circumstances of life, right? And so one thing that I would just state is that we have been thinking about how can we involve organizing in our advocacy. Usually organizing is something that is thought about in a way that's grassroots, or that is, something that is local. And obviously as a national organization, there can be different tensions there. But we're told the same thing about engaging with people. Well, how are we going to do that? We're not a grassroots organization. We don't know how to meet people. Well, when you hire diverse groups of folks who have different backgrounds, when you hire people with lived experience, that kind of comes with the deal. And look at that. So what I will say is that I think that the next thing we need to move into is, number one, hiring more folks with lived experience and shifting our practices as an organization around how we can do that. Number two, hiring organizers. They are good at what they do for a reason. They are good at building bridges and helping to organize around a specific issue or topic for a reason. And those are skills that oftentimes you don't necessarily use in a policy advocacy space. So we shouldn't try to do it if we don't know how. We can hire people to do that, right? So I think that doesn't necessarily solve capitalism and the dysfunction of our democracy, but it does take us a step forward in that direction. And so what I also mentioned, just for the second question, is it really is important in terms of how can you convince someone of the need to concentrate on a bigger issue together? Well, number one, you have to allow folks to share their grievances. If you are trying to bring them into a space to coalesce them around something that still, in essence, even if it's not your intention, is trying to guide them on the path that you desire and not allowing them to guide you on the path, right? So really creating the space for people to share their issues, to share their grievances. And once again, this is connected to their real lives. They need the space to be able to do that. Then making sure that you are facilitating in a manner that, are you providing the space for people to do that? What are you doing that's engaging in your facilitation, right? Are you just letting the conversation flow and you're trying to take it back to this one point that you want to make? But there are engaging in interactive ways that you can bring certain things together, where you bring lots of different ideas and you shape it into, this is our overall goal and this is our overall thought, right? We use word clouds for that. We use Jamboard, which is going away. I could cry. We use so many different interactive tools to get there. So that's a recommendation I would make, and how I'll close out. Thank you for having me, y'all.
Thank you, Parker. And just if I could say a little bit and see what you think about this. The first question, there are also groups like UPlan that community organizing is fundamentally what they do, and groups like CLASP partner with groups like UPlan. So partnerships also maybe would be a great way for organizations that, yeah, okay, got it.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. I often say that most things, not that we're not aiming for perfection, as people have said clearly today, but some things shouldn't be done if you're going to do them really badly. So there are people who do it really well, and we have Ms. Rose, we have other folks here who spend a lot of their time not doing things like reading GAO reports on the SNAP program, which is great. And there also need to be some people who read things like GAO reports on the SNAP program. So let me turn it to you, Monica, before going to Ms. Rose.
I appreciate that tremendously, because I don't want to follow Miss Rose or at all. So I appreciate getting the chance to go in front. I would say I really want to imagine a world where we're not just meeting families where they are, but we're actually meeting families where they dream, right? And to understand what's in someone's dream, what's a part of someone's vision, requires relationship. You can't just read it in a text or in a tweet or on Insta. You have to be in relationship to understand the full magnitude of a dream and to understand the full vision of where we can be as a nation. But we have to start by undoing some of the systemic and structural barriers that have been purposely created to keep people away from power. So I think I just want to encourage everyone on this call to get to know the dreams of those in your life and those that you don't even know. And that's how I think we're going to get to transformation.
That's very helpful, Monica. In some ways, I think it actually connects with partly Parker's answer to how do you get people to think about big goals. Sometimes people may not have big goals, but sometimes we have never really been permitted to think in those ways. So I think it's a really powerful note to leave us with there. Miss Rose, bring us home before I have just the last few words.
So we can no longer let Monica go before me because she's in my head. But that's so very true. Folks often use the term meeting people where they are, and that means so much more to us, because in order to meet me where I am, you have to know where I am. And in order to know where I am, you have to get to know me. You have to understand me. And the issue that you want to push forward might very well be a motivating point, but it might look different from me. And so how do we have those real conversations that get us there? But the one thing I wanted to leave folks with is, well, there's more than one thing, a couple of things. Everyone is a leader in their own way. Understand your leadership and soar in it. Even on the days that I can't walk, I can soar because I know the place I need to get to, and by any means necessary, I'm going to get there. But I also want to encourage us, and kind of directing this to government and funders and all those other powers that be, stop jumping on the next moving bandwagon. It is okay to think outside the box. It is okay to move in the direction that you're moving because this is the direction you want to move in, and you don't have to keep up with anybody else. You don't have to do the latest thing, because that is so not successful. Success is seeing something through to victory. And victory is the word I'm going to use. And in that process, there should be, y'all knew I was going to say it, no decisions made about us without us. And so let's win this thing together. And thank you guys so much for having me. You are all amazing.
You're here. And I get to thank each of you, Andrea, Ms. Rose, Monica, Parker, Alex, and I had high expectations, and I think they were too low. Ms. Rose, you're leaving us with certainly more than one tidbit of wisdom, to say the least, and I agree, Monica. That would have been a great close too. And Parker and Andrea, I've learned a lot from both of you in this conversation, and I think everyone has, by judging from the chat. So I hope that folks can take these insights and your responses, your thinking, and inform their own work as they move forward to shift power, to build partnerships and more. Let me also just give a shout out to the behind the scenes team at CLASP that worked on this, including our development team, Cassie Myers, Megan Gull, and others, and our Tom's friends as well. But thank you for joining this edition of Indi Friends, some old friends, some new friends, and I look forward to having you join us again next time. So we can thank everyone, and you will get a follow-up with some of the resources from us. So thank you all.